What if Hollywood's golden goddesses didn't smell like roses, but like cold cream, cigarettes, and 3-day-old hairspray? Behind the gowns and the glamour, some of the most iconic actresses of the silver screen carried secrets that no perfume could hide. This isn't about scandals or shame. It's about the unfiltered, unwashed truth beneath the legend. Because for every red carpet, there was a dressing room. And in those rooms, things got ripe. Welcome to the side of stardom they didn't put in the press kits. These are the shocking hygiene rumors of 25 Golden Age icons, one whiff at a time. Before we dive nose first into the legends and the lingering odors, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We've got plenty more Hollywood secrets they'd rather stay buried. And while you're here, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it right now? Midnight, lunch break, bath time? We won't judge. Probably. 1. Greta Garbo. Greta Garbo didn't hate fame. She just didn't think it should knock, or speak, or smell like department store cologne. In fact, the elusive Swedish star built her entire persona around the radical idea of silence, on screen, in interviews, and, if whispered rumors are to be believed, in the bathroom. Biographers describe long depressive spells in which Garbo would disappear into her New York apartment and simply stop bathing. The exact length of these hygiene sabbaticals varies depending on who you ask. Some say days, others say weeks. Garbo, famously private, left no diaries to clarify. She once wrote that she just wanted to be alone, but nowhere in that quote did she mention wanting soap. This wasn't laziness. It was devotion to solitude, to control, to a version of self untouched by other people's standards. Garbo's isolation was mythic. She wore sunglasses indoors, used aliases at hotels, and once reportedly turned down a dinner invitation by faking a fever just to go home and eat crackers in the dark. Some say it was depression. Others say it was defiance. After all, the studio tried to make her a polished goddess, but Garbo gave them something far more potent, mystery laced with musk. Her co-stars described her as ethereal. The cleaning staff, allegedly, had less poetic adjectives, and yet her stardom only grew. In a town obsessed with glamour, Garbo proved you could ascend without soap. But Hollywood couldn't stay allergic to scrutiny forever, especially when the next starlet scrubbed too much. 2. Joan Crawford. If Greta Garbo shunned the bathtub, Joan Crawford tried to drown the world in bleach. She didn't just clean, she disinfected reality. Desks, doorknobs, children. In Crawford's house, even the ghosts had to wipe their feet. Her obsession with hygiene became Hollywood legend. She bathed multiple times a day, scrubbed her face raw with harsh soaps, and allegedly used rubbing alcohol as cologne. Her skin reportedly reeked of perfume layered over antiseptic, a scent that said floral with notes of hospital. Her daughter, in her infamous memoir, Mommy Dearest, claimed Crawford's hygiene rituals were less about cleanliness and more about control. The rituals were constant. The house was sterile. The affection was conditional. Crawford reportedly kept her dressing room cleaner than a surgery ward. Crew members joked that they'd get a tetanus shot just for entering. Her costumes were pressed within an inch of their lives. She didn't sweat. She simply exhaled judgment. And yet, for all her scrubbing, something didn't sit right. Co-stars whispered that the sheer volume of soap, powder, and perfume left a chemical fog around her. One crew member described it as being stuck in an elevator with a haunted lilac. Cleanliness, it turned out, could be just as oppressive as filth. Where Garbo avoided soap, Crawford weaponized it. But both women used hygiene, or its absence, as armor. And in the case of the next Hollywood goddess, that armor began to crack. Not from scrutiny, but from something a little stickier. 2 icons in, and already the air's getting a little thick, isn't it? If you're still with us, brave, curious, slightly disturbed, go ahead and subscribe for more beautifully strange deep dives like this. And while the scent lingers, drop a comment. Where are you tuning in from? And what time is it on your end? Late night? Early morning? Somewhere in between deodorant and denial? We're dying to know. 3. Ava Gardner. Ava Gardner was the kind of beautiful that ruined men, and also sometimes bathrooms. She was chaos wrapped in satin, with a southern drawl and a glass of bourbon that never quite emptied. But behind the velvet exterior was something grittier and muskier. Gardner's biographers paint a vivid picture of her decline during her later years, when her drinking intensified and her routines decayed. Baths were optional, one friend noted. She still sparkled in public, if she showed up, but behind closed doors, things got aromatic. She didn't like schedules. She didn't like handlers. And increasingly, she didn't like bathing. One assistant claimed that Gardner could go for days, or longer, without washing her hair or changing her clothes, especially while on location. She'd wrap herself in a kimono, sip gin, and let time dissolve. Some saw it as depression. Others said it was rebellion. Studio life had demanded perfection for too long. Flawless makeup, strategic lighting, and cruelly invasive diets. So when she finally escaped the cameras, Gardner ditched the whole illusion, including the deodorant. And yet, despite the scent stories, people still adored her, lovers still called, studios still chased, and reporters still showed up, hoping for a quote and dodging a hangover. There was a certain power in not caring. Where Joan Crawford scrubbed herself into sterility, Ava Gardner decayed like a myth unraveling in slow motion. But Gardner wasn't the only icon with a fondness for heavy perfume and selective showering. The next name on this list? She practically turned not bathing into a branding strategy. 4. Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor once said, "Pour yourself a drink, put on some lipstick, and pull yourself together." What she didn't say, perhaps because it clashed with the mascara, was take a shower. Because if old Hollywood whispers are to be believed, Taylor's relationship with bathing was as on again, off again as her marriages. Friends and assistants claimed she wasn't exactly devoted to the daily rinse. Instead, Taylor preferred to drown herself in perfume. Fine, expensive, nearly weaponized perfume. Chanel, Ball à Versailles, and the occasional homemade mix that allegedly lingered on upholstery for weeks. She was opulence in human form, and opulence, apparently, did not include a loofah. Her aversion to water wasn't about laziness, it was theatricality. Taylor was a walking jewel box, diamonds on her fingers, eyeliner sharp enough to kill, and skin powdered within an inch of its life. Why ruin the art for a bar of soap? One friend described visiting her bedroom and finding perfume bottles on every surface, like altars to a scent-based religion. Another joked that she smelled like Cleopatra never left the set. Ironically, for a woman so famous for her beauty, the hygiene rumor mill never really stuck to her in a damaging way. Maybe because her myth was already too strong, or maybe because she leaned into the excess, never apologizing, never explaining, always appearing just a little unreal. But while Taylor may have masked reality in Jasmine and Musk, the next actress on our list faced a different problem. She simply never washed her mask off. 5. Bette Davis. Bette Davis didn't suffer fools, directors, or apparently makeup removers. She was grit-wrapped in eyeliner, sharp-tongued, chain-smoking, and unapologetically intense. So when rumors emerged from studio sets that she sometimes slept in her stage makeup, few were surprised. It fit, like her shoulder pads and scowl. Crew members claimed that during grueling shooting schedules, Davis would simply go to bed with a full face on, then return to set the next morning and top it up. Not wash it off, not reapply. Just layer. Think of it as theatrical sediment. The longer the shoot, the deeper the look. In fairness, Davis worked like a war general, 12-hour days, endless close-ups, and a cigarette lit with the ashes of the last. Makeup removal likely ranked somewhere below learn the lines and intimidate the director on her nightly checklist. But the effect, according to gossip, was less glamour and more haunted marionette. Of course, Davis was no stranger to controversy. She fought with studios, battled for better roles, and mocked the idea of Hollywood perfection. Maybe skipping the nightly cleanse was a protest. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe it was just Bet being Bet, an icon who saw vanity as weakness and considered mascara a form of armor. Her look never softened, and neither did her habits. But Davis wasn't the only tortured talent hiding under powder and pressure. The next star on our list didn't layer makeup to perform. She sometimes didn't even wash because she was too exhausted to move. 6. Judy Garland. Judy Garland was the girl who sang about rainbows but lived beneath a thundercloud. Studios made her a symbol of innocence, then crushed her with contracts, pills, and expectations. And when the spotlight dimmed, basic things, eating, sleeping, bathing, fell off the edge of the to-do list. During long work stretches, insiders said Garland often showed up to set disheveled, clothes wrinkled, and hair matted from sleep. The reason? She never really stopped working. Or worrying. The pills that kept her awake for filming were the same ones that stole her nights. And in the haze between performance and collapse, hygiene was an afterthought. Some accounts describe Garland going unwashed for days, too tired, too medicated, or simply too defeated to bother. She'd perform in full sequins one minute, then fall asleep in a dressing room corner the next. Her co-stars adored her, but also pitied her. Behind the songs and sparkle was a woman fraying at the seams. Garland wasn't dirty by disposition. She was a product of a system that wrung girls dry and then called them unprofessional when they cracked. Studio handlers controlled her food, her sleep, and even her teeth. So when her energy gave out, so did the illusion. She was still Judy, but she was also tired, smudged, and slowly disappearing. Her exhaustion became legend. Her smell? Less so. But the myth of Judy Garland wasn't about cleanliness. It was about cost. And that same cost, fame, pressure, perfection, would also take its toll on the next actress, whose scalp bore the price of playing beautiful. 7. Rita Hayworth. Rita Hayworth was marketed as the Love Goddess, a title that sounds glamorous until you remember how much work it takes to keep a goddess-looking camera ready in the 1940s. The truth hidden under the red curls was this. Those curls weren't natural, and they weren't exactly wash-friendly. In fact, washing them too often was practically forbidden. Her studio transformed her look with relentless bleaching, electrolysis at her hairline, and gallons of hairspray strong enough to stiffen a flagpole. Biographers note that the chemical treatments left her scalp irritated and fragile, which meant one thing. Hayworth went long stretches without washing her hair. Weeks, some said. Strategic non-washing, others diplomatically called it. Underneath the bright studio lights, all that hair magic needed to stay intact, even if that meant skipping a shampoo or 10. Co-stars remembered her as radiant, but hairstylists recalled something more practical. The smell of singed chemicals and the kind of hair texture that came from too many days of just pin it up and hope for the best. It wasn't her fault. Hollywood wanted perfection without consequences. The consequences still came. And as the chemicals built up, so did the stories. Nothing sinister. Just the kind of quiet, unglamorous truth hiding behind an icon's glow. Rita Hayworth was adored by millions, but her hair was silently protesting the whole time. Yet for all the scalp sorcery, Hayworth's struggles were surprisingly terrestrial. The next actress, however, drifted between brilliance and breakdown, and when her mind slipped, so did her self-care, bringing an entirely different kind of mystery to Golden Age hygiene. 8. Vivien Leigh. Vivien Leigh lived her life like a candle burning at both ends, and somewhere in the middle, too. Her performance as Scarlett O'Hara was fierce. Her personal battles were fiercer. Friends, biographers, and Laurence Olivier himself described periods where Lee's mental health spiraled, and with it, her ability to maintain basic routines. During depressive episodes, she reportedly withdrew from the world. Bathing, grooming, even getting out of bed became monumental tasks. Hollywood didn't yet have language for mental health. It only had gossip. So when Lee's self-care slipped, some whispered, others speculated, and a few cruelly exaggerated. Meanwhile, she was quietly fighting storms no one else could see. Co-stars remembered days where she arrived on set looking exhausted, hair unbrushed, costume assistants gently trying to piece her back together. None of it was about hygiene. It was about survival. Yet the rumors stuck because Hollywood prefers a scandal to a diagnosis. Vivien Leigh was luminous, brittle, magnetic, and deeply human. And in those unguarded moments, the industry that celebrated her brilliance failed to understand the weight she carried. Her hygiene folklore isn't really about cleanliness. It's about a woman trapped between talent and torment, and how the smallest things fall away when life becomes too heavy to hold. But as tragic as the rumors around Leigh were, the next icon's story takes an odd detour into raw food diets, health fads, and an aroma that reportedly startled more than one co-star. 9. Gloria Swanson. Gloria Swanson didn't just act, she curated her entire existence. Long before wellness influencers and detox teas, Swanson was Hollywood's original health mystic. Raw food, strict diets, unusual tonics, she tried it all. And while it kept her figure camera-ready, her co-stars claimed it sometimes came with unintended consequences. Some colleagues described a persistent, sharp scent that followed her, part health store, part mystery. Was it the raw onion she loved? The health drinks? The strict no-processed-anything philosophy? No one knew, but everyone had an opinion. Nothing scandalous, just the kind of natural body odor that emerges when someone eats like a monk and works like a machine. Swanson herself never apologized. She believed her routines were the key to immortality, and considering she outlived most of her peers, she might have been right. But while she was meditating, juicing, and inventing wellness decades before it was cool, Hollywood whispered. Studios weren't sure how to market smells like enlightenment, so the rumors turned comic, always exaggerated, rarely malicious. It didn't matter. Swanson's presence was so commanding that even her alleged aroma became part of her mystique. A scent that said, "I'm healthy, you're wrong, and yes, I'm eating another raw carrot." Yet if Swanson's story is one of intentional lifestyle choices, the next actress faced a simpler problem. Cigarettes. Lots of them. Enough to leave a trail that no amount of shampoo could chase away. 10. Jean Simmons. Jean Simmons looked like she'd stepped out of a dream. Delicate features, regal posture, that serene English elegance. But if you asked the crew members who worked closest to her, they'd tell you a different story. One that smelled faintly of nicotine and hairspray, with just a hint of week-old conditioner. Simmons was a heavy smoker, and not the occasional socially acceptable kind. The kind that makes people say, she always had a cigarette in hand, and mean it literally. One co-star joked that she didn't breathe air, she inhaled tension and exhaled Winston smoke. And with that habit came the telltale signs. The smell on clothes, the stale air in dressing rooms, and the signature halo of secondhand fog. Hairdressers on set reportedly complained that Simmons would often go days, sometimes longer, without washing her hair, claiming it held its shape better that way. Whether it was convenience, preference, or just a quiet rebellion against the endless grooming expectations of starlets, it created a consistent issue. Camera-ready hair that looked good, but came with a side of texture. Yet even with the whispered complaints, Simmons' professionalism remained unimpeachable. She hit her marks, she delivered lines like they were carved from glass. But she wasn't there to charm the wardrobe staff, and she wasn't pretending otherwise. Simmons' hygiene habits didn't define her, but they did leave a trace. Smoky, stubborn, and strangely fitting. But if Simmons left behind the haze of a long smoking break, The next actress left something more intimate in the air. The heavy, unspoken weight of perfume where water should have been. 11. Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe shimmered. She didn't walk, she floated, swayed, hovered somewhere between persona and person. But behind the pout and peroxide, there were stories. Stories that didn't make the press kits. Stories about dirty sheets, unwashed hair, and a curious preference for milk-based beauty rituals that left a certain scent behind. Directors complained, quietly, that Monroe's trailers sometimes smelled like sour cream left too long in the sun. Makeup artists said she'd show up with layers of unwashed product still clinging to her face from the day before. And there were persistent whispers that she rarely bathed. Not out of sloth, but distraction. Monroe wasn't lazy. She was lost, drifting through appointments, scripts, men, hotel rooms. And somewhere between the image and the exhaustion, hygiene just didn't rank. She was said to douse herself in perfume, Chanel No. 5 famously, and sleep in it, not as a finishing touch, but as a substitute. It became armor, seduction, scent as costume. One anecdote claimed she'd go through a bottle in a week. Another said her pillows always smelled like a department store. Still, none of it mattered. Monroe could appear tousled, tired, faintly musty, and the camera would still fall in love. Maybe it was part of the illusion that someone so luminous could also be so carelessly human. And Monroe's contradictions were hardly unique. The next actress on our list played the polished bombshell by day, but allegedly stumbled onto set with last night's sins still clinging to her skin. 12. Lana Turner. Lana Turner was a studio's dream and a housekeeper's nightmare. She was discovered at a soda fountain, glamorized into a pinup, and turned into the very blueprint of the Hollywood starlet. But between the glossy magazine covers and the frosted curls, the off-screen Lana had a reputation that wasn't quite so pristine. According to gossip columnists and more than a few anonymous crew members, Turner often showed up to set looking, how shall we say, unrefreshed. After long nights of parties, booze, and whatever didn't make it into the press releases, she'd breeze into wardrobe in the same clothes she'd worn the night before. One assistant recalled that her perfume was strong, but the scent of sweat and cigarette ash was stronger. Makeup artists had their work cut out for them. The goal wasn't just glam, it was resurrection. And sometimes they didn't quite succeed. A few insiders claimed that Turner rarely bathed after a night out, preferring instead to touch up the damage with powder, lipstick, and a well-rehearsed smile. Was it carelessness, arrogance, or just survival in an industry that demanded women be both desirable and disposable? Lana Turner knew how to work a camera, but some mornings she reportedly didn't know where she'd parked. She wasn't the only one rumored to skip shampoo in the name of image control. The next actress would take that to a new level, strategically avoiding hair washing altogether in the belief that a little oil was the secret to on-screen allure. 13. Kim Novak. Kim Novak had a face that could stop traffic and a gaze that made directors forget their lines. But she also had a belief, deep, personal, unshakable, that shampoo was the enemy. Not because she hated hygiene, but because she loved her hair, and she believed that washing it would ruin everything. By multiple accounts, Novak was convinced that natural scalp oils gave her hair that soft, glossy, lived-in texture that cameras adored. Washing too frequently, she claimed, stripped away its essence. So she didn't. Not for days. Sometimes not for weeks. It wasn't neglect, it was maintenance. The kind that baffled co-stars and quietly horrified hairdressers. One stylist confessed that working with Novak's hair meant navigating layers of oil, setting spray, and whatever the wind had carried in that day. But Novak didn't flinch. She knew her angles, she knew her lighting, and she knew what made her look luminous. Clean was optional, cinematic was everything. Rumors swirled, of course. Co-stars joked about her hair helmet. Crew members whispered about the scent that lingered longer than her perfume. But Novak, ever the enigma, never bothered to respond. She was there to be seen, not sniffed. And frankly, the camera didn't care. Still, Novak's oil as aesthetic approach was at least rooted in intention. The next actress's reputation came from something less philosophical and far more controversial. An alleged body odor so intense, some whispered it could clear a room faster than a bad review. 14. Dolores Del Rio. Dolores Del Rio was elegance incarnate. She glided rather than walked, her features sculpted like ancient marble, her presence ethereal. But beneath that divine exterior lay one of the most contradictory rumors in old Hollywood, that such physical perfection came with a scent few could forget, and not for the right reasons. According to some old studio tales, Del Rio's strict dietary habits caused a kind of sharpness in the air. Raw vegetables, minimal starches, no processed food. She was decades ahead of her time nutritionally, but chemically, the jury was out. More than one production assistant whispered that her natural odor was pronounced. Others claimed it was exaggerated by racial bias, a cruel smear from a studio system that resented her success as a Mexican actress in a predominantly white town. It's important to note that none of these stories were ever confirmed, and many historians have pointed out how easily aroma gossip was weaponized against foreign stars. Still, the rumor stuck. Not because it was likely, but because it fed a narrative Hollywood loved. That perfection always comes at a cost. And that cost, apparently, was ventilation. Del Rio herself never addressed the whispers. She kept her posture, her dignity, and her mystery intact. Whether the scent was real, imagined, or maliciously invented, it didn't stop her from making history. And while Del Rio may have been undone by studio politics and kitchen herbs, the next actress fell victim to something far more classic: booze, burnout, and the fine line between glamour and grime. 15. Veronica Lake. Veronica Lake had the kind of beauty that made headlines and the kind of luck that didn't last. Her peekaboo hairstyle became a wartime trend. Her sultry voice sold out theaters. But behind the silver screen shimmer was a woman slipping through the cracks. One drink, one missed shower at a time. In her later years, Lake's reputation changed. The scripts dried up, the parties got darker, and the hygiene rumors began. Crew members from her later films claimed she often showed up unwashed, hungover, and in clothes that hadn't seen a laundromat in days. Her iconic waves? Matted. Her breath? Questionable. One assistant said you could smell the night before. Lake never denied the decline. In fact, she seemed to live inside it, drifting from one bad job to the next, cashing in on a fading name, and letting go of the polish that had once made her untouchable. The rumors weren't sensational. They were sad. A woman undone by time, by the industry, by the silence that follows applause. And yet, even in her most disheveled moments, there was something tragically beautiful about Lake, as if she'd been sculpted to be adored but not sustained. Cleanliness was the least of her losses. But if Lake's hygiene reflected collapse, the next actress made it a matter of preference, wearing sweat like it was just another part of her morning tennis routine. 16. Ann Sheridan. Ann Sheridan had a nickname that stuck: the Oomph Girl. Studio execs loved to say it, audiences loved to believe it, but behind the oomph, according to on-set gossip, was something a little less polished, particularly in the underarm department. Sheridan was known for her no-nonsense attitude and her disdain for what she called Hollywood nonsense, which, unfortunately, may have included deodorant. Several crew members joked that she preferred her own scent to anything out of a bottle. Whether it was a rebellion against synthetic fragrances or just a case of indifference, she was reportedly unfazed by the complaints. "I'd rather smell like a woman than a fruit basket," one quote, possibly apocryphal, possibly brilliant, is often attributed to her. She was tough, sarcastic, and allergic to pretense, which made her beloved among the rank-and-file studio workers and mildly terrifying to wardrobe assistants. One costume designer reportedly begged her to try a new deodorant line. She allegedly declined with a wink and a cigarette. Still, Sheridan didn't fall apart under pressure. She hit her marks. She delivered lines like they were punches. The body odor rumors were real, but they were part of a larger truth. She didn't care. Not in a messy way, but in a try-and-make-me kind of way. But not all hygiene complaints were as personal. The next actress on our list had a different kind of reputation, one that lingered not on the body, but in the wardrobe closet, where things were said to fester long after she'd left the room. 17. Susan Hayward. Susan Hayward had the kind of screen presence that made producers nervous, in a good way. She burned through roles, dominated frames, and didn't take direction so much as she challenged it to a duel. But behind that fiery professionalism was a backstage reputation that involved a very specific grievance: unwashed costumes. According to more than a few wardrobe assistants, Hayward had a habit of re-wearing certain undergarments and costume pieces without cleaning them between shoots. Lived in was the polite term. Soured was the one whispered when she was out of earshot. The garments reportedly were stiff, fragrant, memorably so. Why? No one really knew. Some said she didn't trust the studio launderers. Others claimed she simply didn't care. One production assistant suggested it was a matter of routine. She'd worn the same slip for so many takes that it became part of the character, grime and all. Hayward wasn't apologetic. She was known for being intense, not dainty. She came to work to act, not to win points for fabric freshness. But for the people handling the costumes, it became a recurring issue. One assistant supposedly developed a system involving gloves, air freshener, and prayer. Still, Hayward's performances were so compelling that people kept quiet. A little sweat was a small price for an Oscar nomination. But if Hayward's laundry neglect raised a few eyebrows, the next actress on our list inspired something closer to disbelief, with rumors of undergarments that hadn't seen water in entire production cycles. 18. Jane Russell. Jane Russell had curves that launched 1,000 censorship debates. She was the poster child for Hollywood bombshells. Sculpted, sultry, and sewn into outfits that left very little to the imagination. But according to some costume designers, the glamour came with a caveat. Once Russell put on a support garment, it stayed on. For a while. Word around the wardrobe department was that certain undergarments, corsets, girdles, custom bras, weren't always rotated or washed as frequently as one might hope. These weren't your off-the-rack pieces. They were stitched to fit, practically engineered. And once fitted, Russell allegedly refused to part with them for anything short of a new contract. Was it about comfort, continuity, or just habit? One designer said, "We'd ask to take it for cleaning and she'd wave us off, said it was just getting broken in." Unfortunately, so was everyone else's sense of smell. Still, she never missed a beat on set. Russell was razor-sharp, witty, and entirely in control of her image. If she wore something 3 days in a row, it was probably because it worked. And if someone complained, they could take it up with her agent. Or better yet, not at all. Where others were undone by mess, Russell weaponized indifference. And while her lingerie may have overstayed its welcome, the next name in line took things even further, turning delayed bathing into a kind of quiet, fragrant protest. 19. Eleanor Parker. Eleanor Parker was often described as a chameleon, a woman who could morph into anyone on screen, from saintly mothers to venomous villains. But off-screen, she carried a quieter, stranger reputation. Not scandalous, not salacious, just consistently scented. According to whispers from Hollywood backlots, Parker had a personal belief that daily bathing stripped the body of its natural defenses, particularly when it came to the skin. Rumor had it she bathed sparingly, preferring to let her natural oils breathe, as one longtime assistant diplomatically phrased it. This wasn't laziness. It was reportedly a kind of regimen: minimal soap, no harsh scrubbing, and an emphasis on letting the skin self-regulate. A proto-crunchy philosophy decades before it was cool, but in a town obsessed with pristine appearances, it raised a few eyebrows, and maybe a few nostrils. Costume staff reportedly made adjustments: lighter fabrics, frequent airing. The polite kind of conversation where someone asks if you'd like a fresh blouse, for continuity, of course. But Parker herself never seemed bothered. She was cerebral, introspective, and fully committed to her craft. Smelling like herself wasn't a scandal. It was just a detail. Yet even with the odd rumor, Parker's image remained largely untouched. Elegant, intelligent, hard to pin down. She vanished into roles and emerged untouched by gossip, until someone brought up Laundry Day. But if Parker's story was one of quiet defiance, the next actress found herself teased from within her own marriage for a certain aversion to water, proving that sometimes even glamour queens forget to hit the faucet. 20. Lauren Bacall. Lauren Bacall had a voice like velvet sandpaper and a stare that could cut diamonds. She was sharp, dry, magnetic, and, if old Hollywood anecdotes are to be believed, occasionally allergic to showers. The source of the rumor? None other than her husband, Humphrey Bogart. According to multiple biographies and a handful of cheeky interviews, Bogart would poke fun at Bacall's supposed dislike of bathing. He once allegedly joked that Betty hates showers almost as much as bad scripts. Whether it was sarcasm, affection, or just bogey being bogey, the joke stuck and grew into a whisper campaign of its own. Friends and colleagues claimed Bacall was, shall we say, casual about daily hygiene. Not disheveled, never that, but not overly concerned with lathering up either. She'd spend mornings on the tennis court, afternoons chain-smoking on set, and sometimes roll straight into dinner without much interruption in between. But Bacall didn't do scandal. She did control. If she was a little sweat-glazed after a match, she wore it like it was Chanel. If her hair was mussed, it was deliberate. She was always 5 steps ahead of perception, and 10 steps ahead of anyone who tried to turn a quip into a weakness. Still, the jokes lingered. And so did the rumors. But Bacall, ever the tactician, left them unanswered. Let them talk. Let them wonder. Just don't expect her to explain herself. And while Bacall's scent-based legacy may have started as marital banter, the next actress on our list embraced natural odor as an actual philosophy, and wasn't shy about skipping perfume, soap, or societal expectations. 21. Katharine Hepburn. Katharine Hepburn wasn't interested in being adored. She was interested in being left alone. The Hepburn brand was brisk, unfussy, and stubbornly self-made. She didn't care about fashion, didn't need approval, and according to Hollywood lore, didn't really see the point of deodorant either. Wardrobe assistants from multiple productions noted her tendency to show up to fittings straight from a tennis match or a hike, drenched in sweat and ready to argue. She wore trousers when women weren't supposed to. She cut her hair short and refused to play coy. If she smelled like effort, she considered that a compliment. She once said, "If you obey all the rules, you miss all the fun." It's unclear if that was meant to apply to soap, but it certainly seemed to. Co-stars said she'd breeze onto set smelling like the outdoors. Not unpleasant, just raw, real, lived in. Fresh air mixed with effort. There were murmurs that she avoided perfumes and strong scents, preferring instead to let her body do what it did. Makeup artists adapted. Crew members learned to work fast. No one ever accused her of being unprofessional, just unconcerned. Hepburn didn't soften for Hollywood. Hollywood hardened around her. Her hygiene habits weren't scandal. They were strategy, a rejection of artifice, a declaration that brilliance doesn't need to be powdered. But while Hepburn proudly leaned into her natural self, the next actress's rumored aversion to hygiene wasn't about rebellion, It was, allegedly, about nostalgia, a preference for her own scent over anyone else's, including, perhaps, the audience's. 22. Olivia de Havilland. Olivia de Havilland played refined better than almost anyone. Graceful, elegant, articulate, her on-screen presence was like lace draped over steel. But off-screen, the whispers said she wasn't always as delicate in scent. Among the lesser-known studio gossip was the claim that de Havilland actively disliked deodorant and perfume, and, depending on who was talking, most synthetic hygiene products altogether. She wasn't careless, she was selective. According to some who worked closely with her, de Havilland preferred a more natural personal regimen. That meant minimal soap, no strong fragrances, and a resistance to masking the body's own chemistry. She reportedly believed that one's natural scent was part of their identity, something to be respected, not scrubbed out. To her credit, she didn't exactly smell bad, just noticeable. Assistants described her as having a presence that lingered, a subtle mix of linen, aged books, and something vaguely organic. Co-stars apparently got used to it. Directors didn't complain. Her performances were too precise, her discipline too formidable. And maybe that's what made the rumor persist. It wasn't about hygiene. It was about contrast. De Havilland, the embodiment of ladylike restraint, walking around smelling like an apothecary garden in bloom, minus the lavender. Still, not everyone was charmed. Her own sister, the equally legendary Joan Fontaine, had more than a few things to say about Olivia's habits. And not all of them were kind. In fact, some of them bordered on sabotage. Because the next actress wasn't just rumored to smell a little ripe, she was accused of skipping showers by her own blood. 23. Joan Fontaine. Joan Fontaine and Olivia de Havilland weren't just sisters. They were sworn cinematic rivals. The only thing more famous than their acting accolades was their mutual loathing, a decades-long Cold War that leaked into award shows, press junkets, and, allegedly, personal hygiene commentary. In one of the more cutting anecdotes from their long-standing feud, de Havilland reportedly accused Fontaine of rarely bathing. Whether it was said in earnest or just another sharpened barb in a lifelong sisterly spat is unclear, but it stuck. Biographers picked it up, fans repeated it, and Fontaine, true to form, barely acknowledged it. Was it true? Hard to say. Fontaine, like many actresses of her era, had a reserved, almost austere public image. She played vulnerable women with quiet strength. Her off-screen persona was equally understated, bordering on frosty. Maybe she did skip showers. Maybe she didn't. Maybe her sister just knew which buttons to push and how hard to lean on them. Crew members who worked with her described her as professional, albeit distant. There weren't any publicized hygiene complaints from sets, just that one very specific jab from someone who'd known her longest and liked her least. So whether Fontaine was lax about lather or just the victim of family drama remains part of her mystery. But in Hollywood, sometimes the rumor matters more than the reality. And speaking of rumors that refused to die, the next actress on our list was known for glamour so intense it practically radiated. But according to insiders, her wigs and hairpieces carried a different kind of legacy between takes. 24. Barbara Stanwyck. Barbara Stanwyck was a woman of precision. She delivered lines like bullets and wore her toughness like tailored armor. But even the sharpest screen icons have their blind spots. And Stanwyck's, according to studio insiders, may have been resting quietly on her scalp. Costume and hair departments claimed that Stanwyck had a habit of reusing wigs and hairpieces without much interest in cleaning them. Some were used for multiple productions. Others, they whispered, had a well-worn familiarity that lingered into the makeup room. Hairdressers would open the storage boxes and pause, nostalgic perhaps, or just trying not to breathe too deeply. Why the resistance to washing them? No one really knows. Stanwyck wasn't careless, just deeply practical. Some said she didn't trust others with her belongings. Others believed she thought repeated cleaning would damage the wig's styling. Or maybe she just didn't think it mattered. If the look was right on camera, why fix what the lens couldn't smell? Still, some stylists eventually took matters into their own hands, giving the hairpieces stealth cleanings during off hours. Stanwyck never commented, probably never noticed. Or if she did, she wasn't going to make small talk about it. She was a woman who built her career on stoicism, on work ethic, on showing up. If a few wigs bore the brunt of that discipline, so be it. But even Stanwyck's allegedly musty headpieces couldn't compete with the last actress on our list, a bubbly screen sweetheart whose skincare obsession left her with layers of cold cream and reportedly not much interest in removing it. 25. Debbie Reynolds. Debbie Reynolds was America's sweetheart with a punchline for every occasion. She sparkled, sang, tap danced through heartbreak, and somehow still made it to every press call looking like a freshly iced cake. But beneath the glittery veneer and go-get-'em attitude was a lesser-known Hollywood whisper. That Debbie had a long-term love affair with cold cream, and a more complicated one with soap and water. Friends and co-stars joked gently that Debbie lived in her makeup. One even claimed she could fall asleep in a full face, wake up with her mascara intact, and roll straight into rehearsal. Reynolds was a notorious multitasker. She'd work all day, perform all night, and sometimes collapse into bed without so much as a face wipe. Not out of neglect, but because time simply ran out. Her skincare regimen was famous. Cold cream, and more cold cream. Applied thickly, left overnight, sometimes reapplied in the morning. It gave her that soft, dewy look under stage lights. But it also left a residue. On pillows, in dressing rooms, and reportedly on more than one borrowed costume collar. Debbie herself was self-deprecating about it all. "If I stop smiling, I'll crack," she once said. And maybe that was true, because whatever was under the cream was private, untouched. Tired, perhaps, but preserved like a vintage keepsake. She wasn't unclean, she was layered. And under those layers lived a woman trying to hold together stardom, motherhood, and a business empire, with powder, poise, and maybe a little perspiration. Of course, Reynolds' story closes our strange little tour, not with scandal, but with a final, fragrant contradiction, that even the most beloved faces of Hollywood weren't always scrubbed clean.